1. The Murphy and Pacheco Ohanas met at 5 a.m. on the lawn in front of the Kona Inn. It was a great place to watch the start of the race, and not nearly as crowded as the spectator area at the start-finish line on Ali'i Drive. While everyone waited for the race to start, Mike Murphy and David Pacheco, both proud fathers, talked story about their 20-year-old daughters and their chances of turning pro. Overhead, a pit stunt plane was entertaining the early morning crowd with loops and barrel rolls over Kailua Bay. "One of these days that guy will crash," Mike said, and David nodded. The unknown stunt pilot had been a burr in Mike's saddle for a few years. Every Sunday morning, while Mike was reading the paper and having his early morning coffee, the stunt plane annoyed him with the buzzing of Kailua town. Jessica Murphy and Malia Pacheco waited their turn to walk down the stairs onto the spit of sandy beach next to the Kailua Pier. It was only a few steps from there into Kailua Bay for the start of the swim portion of the Hawaii Triathlon. It had snowed the night before on Mauna Kea. The morning air was cool and crisp from the winds that came off the mountain and found their way down to the beach. A few minutes later, Malia and Jessica stood knee-deep in the bay, waiting for the race to start. The water felt cool and invigorating as they splashed it on their arms and faces. "After the race, I'll tell you about the creepy German guy that I first met at the club last night," Malia said, as she shook her arms to loosen up the muscles and get the blood flowing. Before Jessica could say anything, the loud boom of the cannon went off, and Malia dove into the bay like an Olympic swimmer, with Jessica following a split second behind. "I wonder if she said that to throw me off," Jessica thought, as she matched Malia stroke for stroke, trailing a few yards behind. Dieter Schilling arrived in Kona 2 weeks before the scheduled start of the Hawaii Triathlon. Just like he did every year. He always stayed 2 weeks after the race, then returned to his job as an engineer at the Porsche factory in Stuttgart, Germany. Dieter was a triathlon weekend warrior. At 32 years of age, he was in superb physical condition and competed in races all over the globe whenever his work schedule would allow. 5 years earlier, he'd competed as a pro. But there had been an assault on 2 female athletes in Kona that year that had gotten him banned for life from racing in Hawaii. The 2 women had accused Dieter of putting something in their drinks. When they'd woken up, they'd been in a strange hotel room, naked and bruised as if they had been beaten. When police had interviewed the hotel clerk, she described the man who'd rented the room as being tall, with close-cropped blonde hair and a fit appearance, like he was an athlete. He spoke English with a European accent. The clerk thought he sounded German. The police couldn't do anything because there wasn't enough evidence. However, that didn't stop the race promoter from banning Dieter for life, since one woman he'd assaulted was the wife of a major race sponsor. Dieter had tried suing the promoter but lost. For the last 5 years he had rented an oceanfront house on Ali'i Drive, 3 miles south of the Kailua Pier. The house belonged to a colleague who spent a month in Kona every year and rented the place out to help cover the overhead. As far as Dieter's friends and family knew, he was in Kona to train and take part in the annual triathlon. What they didn't know was he was also there to hunt women. Dieter had been stalking Malia after reading about her in a triathlete magazine. He knew she would lead the swim, and that was where he would take her life as his trophy. Malia swam like a shark, and Jessica knew it would take everything she had to stay with her. Her plan was to keep Malia in sight during the swim and bike portions of the race. She also knew she could run her down during the marathon. Jessica and Malia had trained hard together for the last 9 months to prepare for the biggest race of the year. Malia was the favorite to win the 20 to 24 age group. Her goal was to become a professional triathlete. If she did well in this race, she would be on her way to sponsorship and the big money. The only thing standing in her way was Jessica, who could beat Malia on a good day. But Jessica was nursing a sore shoulder from a karate tournament she had fought in a month earlier. Malia had warned her not to fight in the tournament, but Jessica had done it anyway, since she didn't like anyone telling her what to do. Besides, being a pro triathlete wouldn't be her career choice. She didn't know yet what she wanted to do in life, but being a triathlete wasn't it. Jessica only competed in triathlons because Malia did. Where Malia went, Jessica went. They had been best friends since 3rd grade and were always together, like peanut butter and jelly. Malia knew she would beat Jessica back to the pier because she had always been the faster swimmer. But she also knew Jessica would run her down during the marathon portion of the race if she didn't keep a big lead during the swim and the bike parts. Malia was on a record-breaking pace, all alone in front of the pack, when she noticed a scuba diver about 50 feet out in front of her, maybe 20 feet below. It wasn't unusual to see divers taking photos of the racers passing by overhead. What was unusual about this diver was that he had no camera equipment. Instead, he was carrying a spear gun and wearing a camouflage wetsuit. He looked like a typical spear fisherman, except he was using a scuba tank instead of free diving. Malia focused on counting her strokes and paid no attention to the diver until she swam above him. She looked down just as he fired the aluminum spear into her chest. It was too late for her to react. Just as fast as the diver appeared out of the deep, he disappeared swimming south. The surf had been high the last couple of days, and visibility was poor from all the sand churned up from the sea floor. That was why Jessica didn't see him, although she was only 150 feet behind Malia. What she did see was her lifelong best friend floating below the surface with a spear embedded in her chest, blood streaming from the wound. Jessica knew enough first aid not to remove the spear. She grabbed Malia, pulled her to the surface, and screamed for help. She waved her right arm, holding Malia with her left, while treading on the surface. The Coast Guard quick response boat was 400 or 500 yards away when a lookout spotted Jessica waving for help. The boat sped to the scene and brought Malia and Jessica on board. After working on Malia all the way back to the pier, the paramedic looked at Jessica and shook his head. When the press interviewed Chuck Jones, the triathlon promoter, he said Malia's death was a horrific accident. Everyone but Jessica agreed. In her guts, she felt someone had murdered Malia. If it was an accident, why hadn't the person responsible come forward? No, this was deliberate, and 2 days later, the autopsy had confirmed it. In over 20 years, the Hawaii County Medical Examiner, Dr. Kalama, had seen all kinds of different ways people could kill other people. But a custom-made aluminum spear, attached to a spear gun, was a new one. It had been deliberate, all right. It was clear once he removed the spear from Malia's chest that it was designed to kill people, not fish. The tip of the spear had an explosive charge built into it that had exploded on impact and spread shards of aluminum throughout Malia's chest, killing her instantly. A week later, Malia's memorial at sea was scheduled to start at 11 a.m. on Sunday. Early that morning, Jessica went to the jogging track at the old airport to run a few miles. Running always helped her clear her thoughts. Her head was full of questions about Malia that she just couldn't answer. Why did this happen? Who did it? How could this happen? Whenever Jessica went to the park to run, she always took Mojo with her. He was a 2-year-old Akita with a fierce-looking face, which was enough to keep most predators of the 2-legged variety away. Jessica had run 4 laps and was getting into the zone. She had noticed 2 guys sitting on the grass in the center of the jogging track, leering at her each time she passed by. On the 5th lap, they were gone. They had walked to the end of the track that had a lot of trees and vegetation to hide in. When Jessica jogged around that turn on the track, they jumped out from behind the bushes and attempted to rob her. These must have been the 2 dumbest muggers in Kona. Mojo would not let them touch Jessica. He was snarling and ready to tear into them. All Jessica had to do was let go of the leash. Then she did something unexpected. She told Mojo to sit still and she dropped the leash. He did as commanded. Both men were close to 6 feet tall and very thin. They were drug addicts thinking they would roll Jessica for some easy cash to finance their next high. "You give us your wallet and we'll let you go," said the bigger of the 2 men. His face looked like it had caught fire and the flames had been put out with an ice pick. "Yeah, bitch, give it up," the skinniest one said. Jessica's eyebrows narrowed. "You want it? Come and get it," she said through gritted teeth and then dropped into her fighting stance. The man with the cratered face lurched towards Jessica with a right hook. She responded with an inward-outward parry and a simultaneous slap to his face. His partner in crime laughed. As he rubbed his right cheek, he screamed, "You bitch!" He charged Jessica. She side-kicked him in the face. He went down and didn't get back up. The kick to the head didn't kill him. However, the rock lining the jogging path that he hit his head on when he fell to the ground did. The dead guy's partner had no desire for that kind of beatdown. He turned and ran. Jessica's shoulder was still sore, so she let him go. It was his lucky day. She picked up Mojo's leash and finished her lap, then jogged home to get ready to meet her dad and sisters at the pier for Malia's funeral. The thing about a small town like Kona is that everyone knows everyone. Jessica was seen at the park early that morning, kicking the crap out of Keone Wagner. Jessica and her family were at the Kailua Pier, waiting in line to board the charter boat for Malia's memorial, when two detectives from the Kona PD walked up to her. "Jessica Murphy?" Detective Kealoha asked. It was a formality, he already knew who she was. The other detective was Kinji Tashima, who stood there quietly observing. Jessica's father interjected, "What's this about?" "We need to have a word with Ms. Murphy," Kealoha answered. Though Jessica was 20 years old, her father knew the ways of the world, and he knew talking to detectives without a lawyer wasn't a good idea most of the time. "It's okay, Dad. I haven't committed any crimes lately." Both Kealoha and Tashima stood there stone-faced. Mike sighed and nodded. Jessica and the two detectives walked to the other side of the pier, away from the crowd, and talked for 6 or 7 minutes. People began boarding the boat, and Mike stepped out of line while waiting for Jessica. He told his other two daughters, Pua and Jasmine, to go ahead without him. He'd be along in a few minutes. Jessica yelled at Detective Kealoha, "Are you kidding me?" Mike walked quickly towards Jessica and the detectives. Now he knew for sure it was time to lawyer up. As Mike hurried the 50 yards, the detectives were putting the cuffs on Jessica. Detective Tashima walked Jessica to the Crown Vic and placed her in the back seat, while Detective Kealoha stepped between them and Mike as he approached the car. "Why are you arresting her?" Mike demanded. "We aren't arresting her. We're just taking her in for questioning. The handcuffs are for our safety. I got news for you. Those handcuffs would be like pissing on a forest fire if she decided to kick your ass. I'm begging you guys to consider letting her attend her lifelong best friend's service at sea, so she can be there for the spreading of the ashes. The boat will be back to the pier in an hour, and you could take her then as she comes off the gangplank." Detective Kealoha looked at Detective Tashima for a second. Tashima shook his head no. He was strict and by the book. "You guys could go over to the Ocean View Inn and have lunch, on me." Detective Kealoha's stomach was growling. He loved the Chinese plate at the inn, and since he was the senior detective, he decided why not. Kealoha told Detective Tashima to get Jessica out of the car and take the cuffs off. "1 hour, Mr. Murphy. Any shenanigans and we'll arrest you for obstruction. You have my word. As soon as she comes off the boat, she'll go to the station with you." As Mike and Jessica hurried back to the other side of the pier to board the boat before it left, she thanked her father for talking the cops out of taking her in right then. He whispered through gritted teeth, "What the hell happened this morning that you forgot to mention? Give me the Cliff Notes version before we board." Jessica told her father about the two would-be muggers in the park, that she'd knocked one out and left. "You better hope he's not dead." Mike didn't say another word as they walked up the gangplank. "Thanks for the support, Dad." Mike thought about it for a second and stopped midway up the gangplank. He turned and looked at his eldest daughter. "I'm sorry, honey. I shouldn't have said that." As promised, after Jessica spread the ashes of her best friend and the boat returned to the pier, she went with Detectives Kealoha and Tashima to the Kona police station. Mike had told her not to say a word to them until her lawyer arrived at the station for the interview. The only attorney Mike could find to represent Jessica on a Sunday was Michael Zamboni. He had defended the last guy accused of murder in Kona. Mike tried to ignore the fact Zamboni's client had gotten convicted. But everyone knew the guy had done it, and Zamboni was better than letting Jessica sit in jail until a more seasoned criminal defense lawyer could fly over from Honolulu. After 2 hours of questioning, the police arrested Jessica and charged her with manslaughter in the death of the mugger. Mike posted Jessica's bail and grumbled to himself that he should have hired a better lawyer from the start. The next day, the local newspaper ran a front-page story about the arrest of Jessica Murphy in the death of Keone Wagner, a local thug. The reporter who wrote the story was a cousin of Wagner, and by the end of the biased article, the reporter had made it sound like Jessica was the criminal. Monday morning, Dieter Schilling sat at an oceanfront coffeehouse near the Kailua Pier and drank his coffee while reading about Jessica Murphy's arrest in the newspaper. The story said Kona police had arrested the local karate instructor and triathlete for manslaughter in the death of Keone Wagner. It was the perfect scenario in his twisted mind. Jessica would be his second trophy, and everyone would think it was retaliation from a friend or relative of Keone Wagner. Dieter had murdered a female triathlete every year for the past 3 years as revenge for his being banned from racing in Kona. After Malia's death, he craved the thrill of ending another's life one more time before he had to fly back to Germany. He had 5 days left before his scheduled departure. He would take Jessica's life before leaving the island. Dieter called the Kona Karate Dojo for permission to come to a workout session later that day. Sensei Sakata said he was welcome and to wear a white belt. As instructed, Dieter showed up for the class with a white belt. Although that was the custom when visiting a foreign dojo, Dieter was a black belt, and he wanted everyone to know it. Sensei Sakata paired Dieter with a green belt. After watching Dieter show off his skills with 2 cheap shots to the green belt, Sensei Sakata knew the guy was a jerk and needed a special lesson. Jessica saw the punishment that Dieter was handing out and hoped the sensei would let her teach the obnoxious visitor some manners. Sensei Sakata nodded to Jessica, and she took over for the green belt. By the time it was over, Dieter had 2 cracked ribs and a bruised ego. But he had found out what he'd come to learn. Killing Jessica by hand would not be an option. Jessica still lived at home and helped her father take care of her youngest sister Jasmine, who was 5. Their house was only a short walk from the dojo. She liked walking because it gave her a chance to think. There was something about the visitor at the dojo that was bothering her, but she couldn't figure out what it was. She just knew something wasn't right with that guy, besides being a jerk. Could he be the guy Malia had mentioned just before the start of the race? He was creepy, he was German, and Kona was a small town. It was possible. Before, when Malia wasn't around, Lori McConney had been Jessica's go-to friend for all things that involved debauchery. And right now Jessica could use some fun. Lori called Jessica and asked if she wanted to go drinking at the Canoe Club downtown. It was a favorite nightclub in the village that Lori, Malia, and Jessica would sometimes frequent together. Mike was on sea duty that week, so Pua and Jessica took turns watching Jasmine for their father while he was away. It was Pua's night off, but Jessica asked her if she would trade so she could meet Lori at the club that night. Pua and Jessica barely got along most of the time, but this time Pua felt that with everything going on, her older sister could use a night out, so she agreed to switch. Jessica met Lori outside the Canoe Club that night at 10. There was a line to get in, as usual. Lori was wearing a little black dress and stiletto heels. It was clear she had severe debauchery in mind that evening. Jessica wore a tropical print tea dress that hung just below the knee, and brown leather sandals. "I thought you said you wanted to have fun. That Mother Teresa look isn't going to get you laid," said Lori. Jessica gave her the side eye. "You're the bait. I'll just sit next to you and see what you attract besides big, dumb, and stupid." Since Lori and Jessica weren't old enough to buy alcohol, they would spike their cokes with a small bottle of rum smuggled inside one of their purses. Usually, it was Jessica's since she carried a bag big enough to hide a 6-pack. After an hour of drinking and dancing, Jessica went to the ladies' room and ran into an old girlfriend from high school. Carol Ann must have been high on coke and couldn't stop talking about what a great shop she'd found to fix her car. It took Jessica 20 minutes to get away. When she returned to the table, Dieter was sitting there chatting up Lori. Jessica had a few drinks in her, but she saw evil in its human form at that very moment. She couldn't explain it. She just knew there was something dangerous about that man. And not in a sexy kind of way either. "Meet Dieter, Jess," Lori said as she sat close to him with her hand on his thigh. He smiled. But Jessica knew it was as phony as the hunter looking at the hunted. Jessica gave him back her best fake smile and answered, "We've already met. How's your ribs, Dieter?" Dieter wasn't smiling anymore. Lori was clueless about what Jessica was talking about, and proceeded to tell Jessica what her new friend had planned for them the next day. "We're going sailing with him tomorrow." Lori scooted even closer and leaned her head on his shoulder. In disgust, Jessica shook the ice in her empty glass and said she was going to the bar for a refill. "Bring me club soda," Dieter ordered. Jessica glared at him and nodded that she would. Usually, she would have told him to go fuck himself for barking like that at her. But there was a reason she wanted to go to the bar, and a refill was only part of it. Brudda Nick was working the bar that night, and knew all the girls that frequented the club. He was also the bouncer, at 330 pounds and climbing. All Brudda Nick had to do was give someone stink eye, and at most a word or two, and that would be the end of it. Jessica knew him as one whack medevac but never called him that to his face. Instead she said, "How's it, Nick?" It's all good, sista. What can I do for you?" Jessica leaned in a little closer and placed her drink order, then said, "I have one question for you. You see Dat Howley sitting with Lori? Have you ever seen him in here before?" Nick glanced over at the table. "Yeah, he's been trolling in here for the last week or so. Is there a problem? You need me to give him dirty lickins?" Nick asked and then smiled. "You know how to make a girl smile, Nick. But no dirty lickins yet." Lori wanted to go home with Dieter that night, especially after she had been hitting the rum and cokes. But Jessica practically dragged her to the bathroom and said, "Nobody's taking you home other than me." As she pulled Lori by the arm, they passed Dieter sitting alone at the table, and Jessica called out matter-of-factly, "She'll call you in the morning." She then continued to steer Lori out the front door of the club, and to Jessica's car in the parking lot. The next morning, Jessica did her best to talk Lori out of going sailing with Dieter. But Lori had the hots for him, and was adamant about going. Jessica knew she couldn't leave Lori alone with him, and had no other choice but to go along. That morning, Jessica and Lori met Dieter by the slip of the sailboat named Obsession at Honokohau Harbor. As the 30-foot Catalina left the harbor and headed south, the plan was to sail towards Kealakekua Bay, drop anchor and go snorkeling. Even though the ocean was flat, as was typical of the leeward side of the Big Island, 2 miles from the harbor, Lori was seasick and barfing over the back of the boat. Jessica was happy. That would put a damper on the romance for the time being. Jessica couldn't shake the uneasy feeling she had about Dieter. She and Dieter glared at each other most of the way down the coast, until Jessica went below to use the head. The sun was bright that morning, without a cloud in the sky. As it shone through the window into the salon, below deck, it reflected off something tucked between the seat cushions around the dining table. The glare was so bright that as Jessica came out of the head, she had to shield her eyes with one hand. "What the hell is that?" she wondered as she reached over to see what was causing the reflection. It was the tip of a custom-made spear, just like the one that had killed Malia. Jessica had dated a guy who did a lot of spearfishing, and she knew this looked nothing like the spears he or any other spear fisherman used. The scary-looking spear was designed to kill people. Her pulse raced as the adrenaline blasted through her veins. Without a doubt, she and Lori had to get off that boat. When she looked up through the doorway, she saw Dieter staring at her. She was trapped. Dieter slammed the door and locked her in. Lori was at the front of the boat, lying on a towel, when she heard the commotion and got up to see what it was. Dieter pushed her over the side of the sailboat, then pulled out a .357 Magnum he had hidden topside, and fired at her in the water. Jessica could hear Lori crying as she swam away from the boat. Dieter was aiming near her, not at her. He wanted the maximum amount of terror in her eyes before he killed her. Jessica burst through the door, kicking it open. She caught Dieter by surprise as he focused on terrorizing Lori. Before he could turn the gun toward Jessica, she side-kicked him off the boat into the water. Dieter had held onto the gun, and when he surfaced, he took aim at Jessica. There was nowhere for her to hide as he pulled the trigger. The barrel of the gun exploded. Dieter suffered multiple shrapnel wounds, temporarily blinding him as blood blurred his vision. Jessica started the small diesel engine and maneuvered the boat between Dieter and Lori so she could get Lori back on board. Dieter was still alive and swimming toward the shore. He knew he wasn't in any condition to fight Jessica, and she would kill him if he tried to get back on the boat. Jessica turned the sailboat around and motored back to Keauhou Bay. While underway, she called 911 and told the operator the story and that Dieter was swimming toward the shoreline near Kealakekua Bay. The police were waiting when the sailboat docked in Keauhou. The 911 switchboard lit up with calls from passing motorists in Captain Cook reporting a man hitchhiking towards Kona whose face was so bloody he looked like he had been in a car accident. Before the cops could arrive, a Good Samaritan had pulled over to assist Dieter. Dieter had rewarded the man by stealing his car. Dieter knew he had to get off the island as soon as possible. But he also knew he would never get through airport security with his face looking like chopped liver. He rushed to the house where he was staying to bandage his face and grab his go-bag. He'd catch the next flight off the island to Honolulu, where he could get a connecting flight to Germany. At Keauhou Bay, Jessica and Lori told the police how Dieter had tried to kill them that morning and everything they knew about him, which wasn't much. Jessica also informed them about the spear she had seen on board the sailboat and how she thought it was related to Malia's murder. The cops impounded the sailboat and got a warrant to search it. 2 hours later, not only did they find the custom-made spear with an explosive on the tip of it, but they also found the spear gun. Schilling's prints were all over the spear and spear gun. His fingerprints were also in the database from his arrest 5 years earlier, related to the assault case that the district attorney had declined to prosecute. Jessica remembered Dieter mentioning that the owner of the vacation rental where he was staying also owned the sailboat obsession. Even wounded and with a face full of shrapnel, Jessica had seen how well he moved through the water like an athlete. And he was headed towards the shoreline. She bet the rental was where he was going. She called her Uncle Jack in Honolulu with the boat's hull registration numbers, which she had written down while at Keauhou Bay. Since Uncle Jack was an investigator for naval intelligence, he had access to the state and federal marine registration database that would give the address of the obsession's owner. Uncle Jack asked why she wanted it, and Jessica lied, knowing he wouldn't help her if he knew the real reason. She told him she had been paddling and seen a big ice chest full of fish fall over the side of the boat and that she wanted to return it. "How did you remember the hull registration?" asked Uncle Jack. "I had my camera with a big zoom lens in the kayak and snapped a photo as the boat sailed away from me. I was too far away for them to hear me yell." "Okay, I'll look it up and email you the name and address of the owner." 15 minutes later, Jessica was on her way to the address on Ali'i Drive. Jessica pulled up in front of the old Hawaiian plantation-style house on Ali'i Drive. She didn't know what she would find when she got there, Dieter, the cops, or an empty house. Much to her surprise, a middle-aged man was coming out of the house as she turned the Jeep's engine off. He didn't look like a cop since he wasn't wearing a shirt. He wasn't Dieter. Who the hell was this guy? Jessica stepped out of the vehicle and walked towards the man, who was now standing in the yard only a few feet away. "Aloha, is Dieter home?" asked Jessica. "No, who are you?" the man asked with a thick German accent. "Oh shit, there's more than one," Jessica thought. "If you would like, you're welcome to come inside and wait. I'm Hans. I spoke with Dieter on the phone 5 minutes ago. He'll be here soon." Jessica turned and started to walk back to the Jeep when she felt the 50,000 volts from the taser hit her like a Mack truck. In an instant she was on the ground, curled up in the fetal position. Hans picked Jessica up and carried her into the house, laid her on a bed in a guest room, zip-tied her wrists, and then locked the bedroom door. 5 minutes later, still dazed and confused, Jessica tried to get up off the bed. She knew if she didn't regain full control of her faculties before Dieter got there, she was as good as dead. She had a terrible headache as a result of being tased. The only thing she could hear was what sounded like a low-flying airplane over the house that just wouldn't go away. The drone of the engine revving was making her head pound behind her eyes, like she'd been out drinking all night. It was almost too much to bear. 10 minutes later, Jessica had regained enough strength that she felt like she could defend herself against one opponent. But she knew she was still too weak to take on both men at the same time. One of the first things her sensei had taught her years earlier was how to break free from zip ties. Jessica pulled the zip tie that bound her wrists as tight as she could with her teeth, then raised her arms up overhead and slammed them down into her stomach, instantly breaking free. Before going to Dieter's house, she'd left instructions with Lori to call her in an hour. If she didn't answer the phone, Lori was to call the police and tell them where to find her. Lori didn't wait to call the cops. She called Brudda Nick and gave him the address. Just like Jessica had tried to talk her out of going on a date with Dieter, Lori had tried her best to talk Jessica out of going to Dieter's house, to kick the crap out of him, before turning him over to the police. Jessica heard a vehicle pull into the oversized yard that doubled as a parking lot. There weren't any windows in the bedroom, but the old house was single-wall construction with no insulation, and Jessica heard two men outside arguing in German. She recognized Dieter's voice. The adrenaline was flowing. She was as ready as she was ever going to be when they came through the door. Then she heard another vehicle pull in and thought, I sure hope that's the cops. It wasn't the cops. It was Brudda Nick. Hans and Dieter stopped arguing and focused on getting rid of the big Hawaiian. Hey, I'm looking for my friend Jessica, said Brudda Nick. Jessica heard Brudda Nick and screamed, I'm in here. Dieter ran into the house to kill her once and for all, just as Jessica kicked the door open. They came face to face in the living room. They both went into their fighting stances. Jessica was still weak from being tased, and Dieter was having a hard time seeing because of the blood in his eyes. In the corner of the kitchen was another spear gun. Dieter was closer, and Jessica knew he would get to it before she could. She turned, ran back into the bedroom and slammed the door. Before she could barricade the door, there was a horrific noise. It sounded like a screaming engine crashing through the roof of the kitchen. Before the airplane crashed, a pilot in a Pitts aerobatic plane was practicing stall recovery over Kailua Bay, trying to break a record for how many spins he could execute before recovering. Instead, he blacked out and the Pitts crashed through the roof of Hans's house, killing both himself and Dieter. Hans pulled out his taser, but before he could use it, Brudda Nick deployed his decoy, which wrapped around Hans's legs and had him on the ground like a calf in a roping competition. Hans lost his grip on the taser, and it fell on the ground near Brudda Nick, who picked it up and fired the 50,000-volt darts into Hans's groin. Ho brah, you look like one fish out of water. Brudda Nick smirked. Uncle Jack flew over from Honolulu within the hour. Mike picked him up at the airport, and they drove to the Kona hospital to visit Jessica. She had sustained a head injury from a piece of the airplane crash debris that had come through the bedroom wall, and she required 57 stitches. Her father and uncle were both angry and happy at the same time. Uncle Jack started first after hugging her. I hope that bump on the head knocked some sense into you. Jessica took the scolding she had known she would get for lying to her uncle. I'm sorry, Uncle, she said with tears streaming down her cheeks. Mike hugged her and kissed her on the forehead. He decided Uncle Jack chewing her ass was enough for one day. When other friends and family came to the hospital to visit, Mike took his brother back to the airport. As they drove along the highway, Jack said, She's going to turn out good, and I don't think you ever have to worry about her joining the Yakuza. Mike nodded in agreement. Right after the plane crashed into Hans's house, detectives searched the rubble and found jewelry that had belonged to a dozen women reported missing over the last decade. Hans and Dieter had both been hunting women on the Big Island, and they had collected souvenirs from the women they murdered. Usually jewelry, sometimes a lock of hair. The police suspected Hans and Dieter were serial killers who had masqueraded as triathletes and killed a lot more victims than were known. Hans admitted they'd targeted women who were visiting the island. They thought there wouldn't be local pressure on the cops to solve the crimes. He later committed suicide in jail while awaiting trial. One of the first police officers to respond to the crash scene was Officer Sid Akiona. Impressed by Jessica's amateur detective skills, he suggested she take the exam to join the Hawaii Police Department. That is, if she beat the manslaughter charge she faced in Keone Wagner's accidental death. Stinky Pete came forward to testify after a visit from two of Jessica's uncles, both from her mother's side of the family. The men were also members of the Yakuza. They didn't worry about operating within the confines of the law. Stinky Pete knew a short jail term was better than being fed to the sharks as chum. Stinky Pete had been the guy with Keone Wagner at the park that day, when Keone had taken a swing at Jessica. He'd admitted to the district attorney that Keone Wagner had attacked Jessica when the two had tried to rob her. Judge Kinoshita had dismissed the manslaughter charge with prejudice, and Jessica was free to enter the police academy after her 21st birthday. One of Jessica's favorite things to do was to take a plate lunch to the beach at the old airport and watch the sunset. She and Malia had sat there together many times and talked about what they wanted to do in life. Jessica admired her friend's ability to work towards goals in her life, something Jessica always seemed to lack. She missed her best friend, but was grateful for the time they'd had together growing up. Malia's death hadn't been for nothing. It forced Jessica to make a plan for her life and to get to work on it. Fighting the evildoers of the world was now her goal in life. When dusk came, the sunset reflected off the cumulus clouds in streaks of reddish yellow and dark purple. It was like a painting that filled the entire sky, and the most beautiful sunset Jessica had ever seen. She was sure that Malia was somewhere painting it on a canvas that reflected across the Kona sky for Jessica to watch. The end. Death in Paradise is book 1 in the series, and takes place over 20 years later when Jessica is a detective at the LAPD. Please subscribe to this channel to listen to the entire Hawaii Adventure series of books. Or visit your favorite online bookstore to order digital or paperback copies. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please click the like button. Aloha and mahalo. The author. J.E. Trent lived in Hawaii over 22 years and loves sharing the chills and thrill of paradise in his novels. Visit his website jetrentbooks.com for more information about his books. The Kona side of the island is where the story takes place. The island of Hawaii is also known as the Big Island. This short story is a prequel to the novel Death in Paradise, which takes place 20 years later. Death in Paradise is book 1 in the series. Click here.